we wanna make sure we introduce you right. That's why I had asked for a bio because
Yeah.
You're
telling
listening to
Vanessa, I
Yo
said
FM.
David
Pursuing ancestral
is
medicine with
he's
Vanessa
one of those
Minutapia
people
and
who
Cesar
our
Barreras,
communities
coming to you live from
depend on.
Plains
That
Maidu and
you guys
Nisenan
serve as a
Territory,
foundation,
otherwise
as
known as
elders, as a
Sacramento,
foundation
California.
for our communities
Ubeyai
to be able to
territory here in
prosper,
Southern
right? To
California.
carry on to the next generation. Because you guys carry that knowledge from previous generations. And I said, even if he sends me a biography, I don't think we're going to be able to do justice to who David really is. So people can truly understand and engage, who you are and why it's so important that, elders like yourself are given the attention needed. Just to give you guys a little bit of background information on who David is, I think he really went short on the biography he gave us, but I'm going to go ahead and show it off to you guys. So he has served 2 terms on the Tohono O'odham Nation Legislative Council from 1995 to 2003. He is a member currently of the O'odham Elder Council in Arizona, with tribal members which include Gila River and Salt River O'odham people. In 2017 and 2018, as a delegate for the American Indian Movement, um, at the time west out of San Francisco, California, he has attended the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and he sits as a high advisor to the UN Economic and Social Council for the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. He uh, he is a lifelong activist, lifelong cultural promoter. He speaks his language, and he is often you will often see David addressing, um, you know, human rights, not just indigenous rights, not just migrant rights, but human rights as a whole. And I think that speaks to the kind of person he is. Um, and without further ado, we would like to present David Garcia. David, how are you doing today?
Welcome, David.
Thank, thank you so much. And just want to say, Bantasrochu, Apomuiwu, Sijafam, Mamsupe Oya Pohuma, Tachka, Amanikai, Makinyok, Matasi Masmama Ursa to Ginyok, Apomu Aham Autumn, Hukamo, Momuaka, eat a witch too much, Manutu to Hasmas Mami Nuchka, making Chipkan, the Bashochi, Man Sisa Pintat, Matamanika. So thank you very much. Again, my name is David Garcia, and I just want to thank Caesar for our conversation last night. And it was very, as when you asked me that, and I said, of course, yes, I never say no when it comes to being asked to do something. And so this is very important as well to be a part of this conversation because once again, it's these kinds of conversations that we have that gives a better perspective or a better knowledge of exactly what is actually going on in Indian country, whatever it might be. Again, thank you so much.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here with us. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you, David. Shoko Tesia in RUM language for being here. Thank you. And David, so, you mentioned it's an election year. Are you running for anything this year?
No, I've stepped out of the tribal leadership role several years ago. I did run for chairman years ago, and then I was also asked to be a running mate at one time. But I was asked to run again for community rep or to sit on the district council. But my decision was no, because I just felt that I don't want to put too many things on my plate. Plus, I wouldn't be able to do a lot of the things that I'm doing. Uh, but again, that was a decision that I made. So. But it doesn't leave me out of the conversation of what goes on with the Tohono O'odham Nation.
What kind of projects are you currently working on, David? That you're
Well, as I was telling you last night, I'm planning on traveling to Orange County, Anaheim, to be a part of a gathering on May the 9th uh, 209 East Lincoln Avenue. And the gathering is specifically for one of an elder who taught the Nahuatl language, and his name is David Vazquez Hernandez. And he passed away, I believe it was around maybe January or so. But he was teaching the Nahuatl language in Santa Ana, California. And I have to tell you that I met this elder years ago in California, and he was able to I was able to sit in on his class, and also the other thing was that he was a part of the doing away with Columbus Day in Anaheim, Orange County. And he played a big part. Not only that, but he also wrote a letter that I also entertained with the American Indian Movement West in San Francisco, addressing the language on the International Declaration on Indigenous Peoples. So he played a big part in that, as well as in Anaheim. So every year from this point on, the city of Anaheim will recognize the Indigenous Peoples Day every second Monday of October.
Well, what do you think, David, that we can do as younger generations to follow in the footsteps of elders like David Hernandez himself, who left a legacy, right? How do we follow in the footsteps of people like that?
Well, I know that I know for me, what everybody has their own uniqueness in what they can do. There's a lot of people that don't know how to read or speak the languages and what have you. So as I had said many times, well, I think I spoke at UCLA maybe 3 times before, back in around 1996, 97, somewhere along there. And wherever I've been, when I spoke to young people, is that whatever you do after you complete your education, of course, there's a lot of things that you can do, but just to step back and look at where you came from and your upbringing, because what's so important is for young people, with the education that they have, they can help their community members in just so many different ways. Yes, there's always finding a job and and doing those kinds of things, but at the same time, we just need a lot of help. We just need a lot of help, and so time will tell in whatever direction or however way that young people will make those decisions. But I would hope that they don't turn their backs from our elders and what they're having to deal with when it comes to makings that are being made by the government as a whole. And I'm talking about the government, whether it be tribal government or United States government, because it has a huge impact on how we are affected directly and indirectly. So for a young person or young people, whatever they pursue after they complete their education, is to kind of just remember and look back and see, how can I help? What may be happening or it's not happening back home. And I think it just takes trust is the most important thing that I believe. As long as you gain trust from the people, you can't go wrong. It's a learning process, really.
And it's quite interesting the way you said it. You can't go wrong by gaining the trust of the people, right? Coming to a community or returning to a community. A lot of times, our people have to leave the community to get an education, right? Most of the time, or sometimes, we're not able to get the education, right? off the reservation, right? So we have to leave, come back, or leave our communities and come back, right? And gaining that trust back, right? Like you said, it starts with the foundation of trying to help and putting our hearts to it. The younger generations listening, I think that's very inviting, for them.
One thing that really resonated with me that you said was everyone's unique. We all have gifts that can really benefit others. And one thing that I really appreciate you saying is that, what it really takes is just participating and putting in that time and effort, and that it's okay. Like it's okay to like how you said, it's a learning process. I know for me, like I didn't grow up in Yaqui. I didn't grow up in Sonora, where my mom is from. I grew up in Northern California. And so there was a period in my life where I felt like it was very lonely, like where I had to hang out with other folks from other communities and find people I could connect with. And so one reason why I went into engineering, I'm a civil engineer, was because of my family, because I saw my family struggle and because I saw the environment struggle. And I knew for me that it was really important to try to reach backwards and kind of, reclaim things that had been taken. And there was this idea I had in grad school, or actually as an undergrad, that, there were engineers here before colonization. And so I was seeking out those native engineers. And I guess that was medicine for me, was trying to learn about indigenous engineering methodologies and trying to gain that understanding that there was science here. There was studies, there was methodology, there was an understanding of the world around us that now it feels like there's more of an interest in. Like when we talk about California and the wildfires, there's this interest in trying to get indigenous knowledge to partake. And so I really want to stress and encourage, and I feel like that's a really important word, encourage the youth, because I'm a little bit older than Cesar over here, but I want to encourage the youth to try to participate and try to take what their gifts are, like how you said, everyone's unique, to give back and to look back and to really appreciate where we are now.
Yeah, and I think that's why it was important on the first tour that I gave back in 1996, might have been 95, 96, somewhere along there, when I went to speak at UCLA. And so I invited the students. They came from UCLA, Northridge. What is it? Northridge. No, yes, and Fullerton. So it was important for me to invite young people so that they could actually see, because back then there wasn't really a lot happening like it is now. So they were able to come and spend 2 nights and 3 days on the reservation, and I was able to set up meetings with district officials, the police, the nation's police department, and United States Border Patrol, because again, there was just so much negativity about Border Patrol. But when they actually witnessed a Border Patrol agent and heard out his presentation, I think their thinking changed back then. So it's entirely different now. So my intent was to educate young people based on what was happening on the southwest border, and I continue to do that. And that's when Caesar and your group came down and you made all the arrangements and what have you. That was also very important, and that's basically what I try to do. I know that in 2018 was the same thing with another organization made up of indigenous women who were part of the Human Rights Network group. I was able to bring them out to the reservation, and these were individuals from the Pacific Islanders, Africa, of course, the United States, and what have you. So again, I was able to learn from them, because not having traveled in those areas, they also too have borders. So it was a good education for me to learn from them as well.
Yeah, David, it's very interesting because you know how nowadays with social media, you know, a picture pops up on your Facebook, or you get a reminder, you know, 3, 4 years ago, this happened on this date. So it's very interesting because every year since since those students at UCLA took a trip, you know, to visit you and come meet you, every year on Facebook and, you know, their social medias, they get this notification that says a year ago or 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, you visited, you know, Sells, Arizona. And they still text me those pictures. Actually, as a matter of fact, 2 days ago on the 22nd was the 4th year anniversary that we took pictures with yourself, and we crossed the border, and there was those you know, agents and Mexican soldiers at the border. And,
Right.
you know, it was a very interesting experience, and I think these students really grew from that. It really changed their perspective on the dynamics of what it means to be a tribal nation, having to deal with issues, not just infrastructural issues, but also having to navigate two different nations all at once. In this case, Mexico and in the U.S.
I think everybody has a big question on what they see on social media until they actually are there, physically there. And of course, you were able to, like the other students, were able to speak to the two federales, or they were the military, and they were talking to the students, and they were responding back and forth. And so that was an opportunity for all of you to share some information. And I think that's very important because again, until you actually physically are actually there and be able to see it for your own eyes versus seeing it on, you know, I mean, because there's just a number of things that you can see on YouTube and what have you. But when you're actually there, you can honestly say, well, you know, I was here, I was able to experience this, and then you go and you share it with other people. But that's the other thing that I tell people is that share it wherever you may go, in spite of having to go through this bureaucracy of getting permission and what have you. But it worked out for yourselves and others that have actually been on the southwest border on the reservation side.
Yeah, it sure did. And I think that the students still ask me to this day. So it's been 4 years, you know, like we were discussing, and every year since then, you know, because a lot of these were graduating seniors, you know, they were just about to, you know, get their education, like you mentioned, go back to their communities. So that every time we get a new group of incoming freshmen into UCLA, the first thing that the students talk about, now some of them are professionals working at UCLA. Sometimes they're guest speakers that, you know, that just come in. And the first thing they tell the students, they say, by far one of the best experiences I had at UCLA was traveling to the O'odham Nation and get this tour and truly see for ourselves, like you were mentioning, what the real situation is and how things are navigated, you know. And ever since then, I get bugged every year, you know, we need to do another trip. We need to do another trip. And unfortunately, when we were planning, I had contacted you before COVID. You know, we want to bring another group.
Right.
And it really changed the dynamic of how you mentioned how grassroots movements move along. It's
And I was able to meet as it was said to me, the longest living woman, Yaqui woman in rural Yaqui, which was Maria Matus, I believe her last name was. And I have a picture of this group picture that we took. So again, a lot of these individuals that I've been able to meet who have already passed on, so they take a lot of their history with them. And so getting back to earlier in our conversation is that's how important it is to educate ourselves and to going back to oral history, because that's the only way that you're going to truly hear the message. They're no longer here, and it's a big loss throughout anybody's life, really. And so the only thing that you can resort to is, of course, literature, but you don't get the same information, or you don't see for your own eyes and listen to that history. And you can just imagine somebody living over 100 years, and just imagine how they lived their life up until the time that they passed away. There's just a lot of things that went on in anybody's life, really.
Yeah, David, it's. I think you I'm kind of bringing it back. You mentioned this idea of you mentioned Maria Matus, right?
Yes.
And she's considered by many UM elder UM as one of the last great medicine women that our nation had, and herself along with Petra, Doña Petra. Petra is still living, right? Petra Leon, but unfortunately we did lose Maria Matus, right? And
Yeah.
when we lose an elder of that magnitude, when the community loses someone like that, a lot of times they acknowledge with them that we're never gonna be able to get back. Never, it's gone. And that's very unfortunate, David. But if we were to ask you, David, here at the moment, right? Because like you mentioned, not everyone at the moment can be able to witness a trip to the southwest border. But if we were to ask you, David, share with us, things that you think young people should really pay attention to today, that that otherwise they wouldn't be able to receive. But because we have you here, here with us today, what will you share with them?
The biggest thing that's going on right now that's in discussion with the United States Congress is immigration. And I have to include all tribes that live in the United States on the southwest border, because we're also impacted. Tribal members that live on both sides of the border, because we're never part of the conversation, and we have to be, because there's a lot of discussion that's ongoing right now, and you can't allow the fear. This whole. That's not to say that it's not happening, but what's important is that this whole issue of immigration is that you can never underestimate how it'll hit home. And it hit home with me, not so much personally. I mean, me personally, but it happened with my relatives in Sonora, where they were arrested and deported, and that has happened before. And so there was really no support or even help when it ended, when they were detained and apprehended, and because they don't speak Spanish, I mean English. Their Spanish is very limited. So let's just say, for example, Caesar, if that had happened to a family member or a relative, they have no clue what's going to happen. And so with my first cut, my cousin, who is my brother on the O'odham side, he was arrested and he was held at the Davis Mountain Air Force Base, and so I wasn't allowed to see him, but he was held for about 2 weeks, and he was never charged. He went to federal court, and so there was no help from the tribal government. It wasn't until I intervened. And it just became something. It became so political, and that was something that I included in my 3-minute speech at the United Nations Permanent Forum in 2017 and 2018. And I've been sharing that story as I go here and there, because that can happen to anybody. There's never any discussion about Indian people or indigenous people, whether it be the Southwest, because that's all you hear is the Southwest border. Nothing is really said about the Canadian border, the United States. So that's how important it is. That you kind of just look at things maybe 20 years ahead. 20 years ahead. I mean, who would ever know that there would be a wall built, during Trump's administration? Who ever thought that during the Obama and Clinton's administration there would be a vehicle barrier supported by the United States government. You know, these administrations who were making decisions that have a direct impact on how the Southwest border looks like today as we speak, and what's been happening, you know, with the migrants who are coming into the United States for the same reasons that we all did, you know. Uh, so that's a huge impact that it has created. Um, and so where do we stand at? I think we all have to be a part of it, in spite of whether we agree or disagree. But as long as you participate wherever it might be and whatever you know, you're able to share that with others who have no idea what's actually going on locally. It's huge. It's really huge. So Vasquez is in the same situation. I mean, look at what has been happening for years when the late Jose Matus had to go into real Yaqui to bring in the ceremonial people, the kinds of things that they had to deal with coming through the port of entry in Nogales, Arizona, how they were treated, you know, the Kumeyays, you know, in Baja California, you know, the Kikapus in Texas, you know, all of these things are so important. But and if you don't know that, then you never will understand, or you will never know. Those are the kinds of things that are happening to you, or to people that are members of, you know, whether it be your relatives or people in general. People in general.
Yeah, you mentioned something important, David, that I don't think people really think about, right? Every single person that lives in this Southwest area, whether it's California, whether it's Arizona, whether it's Texas, they have been directly impacted by, you know, like you mentioned, decisions taken by, you know, presidential administrations that date back, you know, 20, 30 years, and how it has shifted the way the way we live, the way we examine, and the way we truly understand, right, immigration, and the way we looked at immigrants. But you mentioned something even that has a big impact in Indian country. About 100% of the time, these conversations forget about the original inhabitants of these lands. They're forgotten, right? How can we bring more awareness to this, David? How do you think we're able to use our voice and our platform to bring attention? You know, because we see a lot, at least through social media, right? Or like you mentioned, YouTube and all these pages, we see children being detained at the border.
Mhm.
That is something that, whether, like you mentioned, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, you're aware that there's being children being detained in the border. You know,
Right.
that's no longer a secret. Everybody knows this, right? And a lot of the times these children are indigenous children, right?
Yes, of course.
Mhm.
So how do we, you know, bring attention to this subject, but that's going to propel a change? What do you think? What's going on here, David?
Well, I do know that, and I'm speaking when it comes to addressing our tribal leaders, uh, is that I personally hold our tribal leaders accountability. I hold that to them, and they know that I hold them to, so that they be transparent, that they hold their when they take the oath, that they stand behind the nation's constitution, and when it comes to our legislative reps, that I hold them to their plan of operations. So I'm speaking about tribal leaders, but when it comes to local governments, it's no different. You know, there's a way of doing it. You can be very professional, and sometimes it doesn't work. You have to be respectful. So now you have to change the way that you do things, and the way that I basically do things, so that you know exactly what you're there for. Is so you have to do your homework, and you have to talk their talk, so that. And what I do is I bring what's already decisions that have already been made, that's already in black and white, so that they cannot ignore that. And it's no different from our tribal government system. That's basically how I found things. And then, of course, it's no different from grassroots people, the different associations that you may have in solidarity with other groups. If you're there in solidarity, then you support them and you help them in however way.
Thank you for sharing that, David, because I think a lot of times as younger generations, we kind of lose sight, and we let passion undertake the way we do things, right? Because these are all subjects we all feel really passionate about. We all have an opinion about them, and we all want to act on it a little bit differently. But you mentioned something very interesting. You said we always have to try to be respectful, right? And that's the elders' way. Respect is the base for everything in this life. And so,
well, let me ask you a question, because I'm sure that you've been asked, because of who you are and your background and your education. I'm sure that you've been faced with things like that. Or have you ever been faced with some of the things that I mentioned earlier? And how did you deal with that? Did you just follow the status quo, or you just kind of just sat back and not really participate?
It's an interesting question. So at UCLA we had our community of Native students, right? The American Indian Student Association, and we were a family. We were represented by all tribal nations. But as a group, we also had to deal with the bureaucracy that the institution provided for us, right? I always tell people we take great pride in the fact that the powwow is the biggest event not run by the university on campus. The powwow we have been putting for almost 50 years. And it's also the biggest event, the second biggest event on all UCLA in terms of attendance after, Bruin Day, which is the day that everybody visits UCLA for, when they get admitted, because of dynamics that change in the institution. Um, we were faced with talking to deans and talking to chancellors and trying to navigate and trying to get them to understand why, as Indigenous students, we are a bit different than your average student. We have to carry the weight of our community. We have to carry the weight of our families. We have to carry the weight of the student. But we also have cultural duties that also push us to seek different avenues to reach what we consider success. And one of those things was, we had to petition to the university, to go and do this cultural duty on behalf of solidarity, because the whole reason why ASA was created at UCLA was on the basis of activism, right? And the university, backed that up. They said ASA is a student org that is run on activism for the well-being of American Indian people. But when we were receiving that, support, and they had documents signed saying this, we had to reach an agreement. And unfortunately, they were able to send 35 students from UCLA after we, navigated, and 35 students were able to go for 2 weeks to Standing Rock. So I was amazed at how well it worked out for us, but we kept it respectful the whole time, So there's been those instances.
Oh, and I didn't know that. I never knew that. I just know that it was huge, and it's still being talked about throughout Indian country, how Standing Rock was the turning point. But there are different turning points throughout the generations that have made a difference, and Standing Rock has been the recent one. I mean, there's been others, but there will be more. There will be more.
Yeah. Yeah, the fight goes on, right? It's something that never ends.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying. That's what I've been doing from the very beginning. It's just to talk to people, talk to young people, just try to give them a bigger picture of what has been going on. It just didn't start. I mean, even when I was a young kid, there was already movements back then throughout Indian country. Now, as we know it, is Indian country, just as it was in Mexico. I mean, there was always a movement, and there will always be movements. If we don't know what other tribes are having to deal with for protecting their sacred sites, that's one example. And it's no different from Oak Flat with an open pit copper mine with the San Carlos Apaches, and it's no different from what just happened early this year, with this wall that's been built right along one of our sacred sites, which is just west of the Lukeville Port of Entry, Quito Piquito. Of course, it's been on the video what happened to those tribal members. They were arrested. One was shot at with a rubber bullet, and now they're facing trials. So those are the kinds of things that are happening.
All these issues that you presented here have one thing in common, that they're all in the southwest border, and none of these issues are very well known to the public. I mean, some of these things that you're mentioning now are things that I'm barely catching on to. And I'm sure it's the same thing with Vanessa. Vanessa, were you aware of some of these things? And things really took a turn after 01, at least border-wise security, in the way this dynamic of how immigrant people were seen and how indigenous people were seen. And, we kind of look the same. A lot of these immigrant people look very similar to our people living in these lands, and I think it really shifted the perception of how people looked at indigenous people living here at the borderland. How do we bring more attention to these issues, David? Again, this is something highly political, and it lands a lot of people in the hot seat when we talk about these kind of subjects. And I'm sure you have experience at the hot seat, Right?
Yes, I have, but I've been able to deal with it because if you don't say anything and you don't participate, nothing's ever going to happen. Nothing will ever happen. Nothing will ever be known. I was doing humanitarian aid to the migrants, providing humanitarian aid, water and food, along with another tribal member. And I was sitting on tribal council towards the end when my term ended. And that's another thing, nobody had any idea that there was even a map that Humane Borders had put out. These are only individuals who have been found on our reservation, on the Tohono Nation, by way of the numbers that have been accumulated and have been identified as migrants. And I'm talking years ago. We don't know how many people have actually died on our Tohono reservation, and the only time that a remains will be found is if a livestock owner is out there and he's rounding up his livestock, come across remains or a bone and what have you, a skull, then it's those are the kinds of things that happen. So when I'm talking like maybe 10 years ago, Humane Borders, I think they had recognized something like more than 3,000 remains. That's just remains that have yet to be identified. So there's a cemetery here in Tucson, and you might be familiar with this, Caesar, which is the Evergreen Cemetery. There's a section of that cemetery where John Does and Jay Does are buried, because they can't identify the remains with the Tucson coroner's office. So when I So when we had when I participated in the International Treaty Council Summit years ago, I specifically gave a map to who is still the director of the International Treaty Council, Andrea Carmen, only because she was going to be giving a presentation to the National Congress of American Indians in California. And I specifically told her to take that map and have her share it at the National Congress of American Indians. And the same map I gave to back in 2007 when the Zapatistas came, when Marcos came to the north, and I personally gave him the death map. And that was when the first time I met a journalist from Italy who was basically educating me about what's happening on that part of the country, who people are dying, traveling from Africa into Europe, drowning in the oceans there. I had no idea. If I had never met this journalist, I would have never known. It was tragic, very tragic.
You think you can share that map with us, David? I think
you can log on to Humane Borders. Those are maps that you can get that information on their website. Yeah, so that's something that that people are not willing to want people to know. But I've been very transparent. I've been very open, and people know me. I speak my mind, and I just put it out there. It's no different from what I think is important. What you can and can't do. That's not to say that. I mean, you've got to kind of do it in such a way so that you're just not somebody that's just speaking out there somewhere. But you got to have some concrete. You have to have a base. You have to have some understanding, and you've got to back up your information, not just something that you just get up somewhere and then it's like people are going to take it for 100%. It just doesn't work like that. That can happen.
David, this thing blows my mind in the sense that of all these remains, right? And I keep going back to this concept, David, of indigenous forced migrations, because I always tell people or compare it with them. Indigenous people have been at the forefront of forced migration since colonial intrusion came into our homelands. Wherever it is, South or North America, there has been forced migrations of indigenous people at the hands of colonial regimes that have pushed us from our homelands. A lot of these people, you mentioned the number 3,000, which is completely staggering. That is known, right? There's probably more out there just waiting to be discovered. Remains that cannot be identified. We don't know if it's a male. We don't know if it's a female. But what we do know, and almost with certainty, is that these people have indigenous in them, right? And they're part of a movement of forced migrations that, where it's no longer, okay for them to live wherever they're at, or where their living situation just shifted completely because of the dynamic of how the world has changed, again, at the hands of regimes. David, how is this narrative so close related to the narrative of missing and murdered both indigenous women, children and men?
I can speak to the migrants. And what I mean by that is that when I was asked years ago to assist to search remains of individuals, and these were not all Mexican nationals. They were coming from Central America and South America. And so I was able to meet, and we're still good friends. He now works for the Guatemalan consulate here in Tucson. But prior to that, there was only one office, which is in Phoenix. And so what I didn't know was that there was a community of Guatemalans here in the city of Tucson, but more so in Phoenix. Now, my friend who fled Guatemala as a refugee because of the murders, over 1 million or close to 1 million indigenous people were killed, and was supported by a Catholic priest. Imagine that. He fled Guatemala, came to the United States as a refugee. Now he's a citizen, works for the Guatemalan consulate. But when he would contact me to ask him if I could take him and individuals to search for the remains, and I said, fine, yes, of course. It was the stories that they told me, because by then these people were traveling from, like, say, New York, Pennsylvania, Florida, Southern California, Utah, who had already established themselves in the United States, but were coming to Tucson to assist and help find remains. But so their story, I would ask them, because I was also interested in who they were. And so that I heard, and they told me many stories, how they ended up in the United States, and most of them were refugees, men and women. Some of them were almost as old as I was, a couple of years younger. I'm 69 years old. But the stories that they told me, and then to actually witness when we found very few of their relatives on the reservation who died. And I'm thinking, what could I say to change the situation? You know what I'm saying? And most of them we were not able to find their loved ones. So they would have to leave because they had to get back to work, you know? There was nothing that I could say or to change the situation and how they felt, because their hopes was, Caesar, was that now they were able to have somebody help them to look on the reservation, to look for their loved ones. And when we weren't able to find, they had to go back to wherever they came from, wherever they were living at and working. Those are tragic things that have happened, and to witness it and to see that. But the stories that they told me, so I can imagine the individual, whether they came from South America or Central America or even Mexico, when they first took the first step, imagine what they had to go through if they managed to get into the United States and to live, Caesar, and to live. Now, the stories with the women was even more tragic, you know. It's a known fact. A lot of them were murdered. A lot of them were assaulted. A lot of them were murdered. A lot of them were kidnapped. Those are very tragic stories. And to witness and to meet some of these people that actually lived, who are now still having to deal with living so that they won't be found and arrested and be deported back to whatever the country they come from. So let's go back to the stories. You know, those are tragic things that they told me. Most of them were women. Most of them were women who lost their lives out on the reservation.
It's quite tragic, David. I lived all my life in a border town, whether it's in Arizona, whether it's in California, and the stories are just it's devastating. It's tragic. You know, we're not holding accountable the aggressor, right? And I think
Right.
this goes to this idea that is widespread, right? It doesn't matter the color of the skin. It doesn't matter the cultural, ethnic background of the person. But this idea that the victim has to prove, with beyond measurable prove that they were assaulted, that they were on the receiving end, is just abnormal.
When you're trying to help people and you're trying to make some change, but you got all these other things that are preventing you from doing that. We were talking about, humanitarian aid. Providing humanitarian aid, water is life for that. We were willing to go to jail because that's how important it was to provide humanitarian aid, because nobody's going to do it. You can't pick and choose your battles as an activist. Either you are or you're not. Either you do it or you don't do it. But what are you willing to do to change the situation that I may not be in it, but other people? And so we did what we had to do. We did what we had to do. It didn't matter whether I was a tribal leader. What mattered was it was life and death. Life and death. It was a moral issue, a moral question. It had nothing to do with religion, not on my part, that's for sure. It's about living. Because if we don't provide humanitarian aid and you don't have water, you're going to die. If you don't have food for a certain length of time, you're going to die. And once you cross that line, nothing can help you to bring back your life, because then your body starts to shut down. And there's no turning back. And when you see that, and when you smell that, Caesar, you'll never forget the smell, what a decomposed body smells like. That's the reality of what happens. That they read the Bible, they go to church, and then you're going to deny food and water to a human being? And then to not be willing to meet the people that are coming, who are looking for their loved ones. You're not willing to even talk to them or meet with them. And then you're gonna put the police department on them. Who do you think you are? Who do you think you are? That's the lowest you can go. To me, I don't know about you, but to me, that's the lowest you can go. You have no heart. When you know that there's somebody out there that needs water and food, and you're sitting up at your house, and you call yourself a tribal leader? Yeah, a tribal leader, I guess, for your constituents, but there's more to that than that. But those are just my opinions. But having lived through that and dealt with that, that's how important it was for me and my friend. To me, it doesn't matter what happens to me, Caesar. I just know that I'm trying to do the right thing. That's all I'm trying to do. I don't have anything to gain. I don't have anything to gain. I'm not trying to be this individual. I'm just trying to do the right thing. That's all I'm trying to do. But I'm getting too heavy. I'm getting too deep.
Oh, it's good. It's good, David. I think we need to hear that. I think people need to hear those kind of conversations. Right? Those are conversations we need to have, and people need to be held accountable for those things, because otherwise this thing keeps going and it becomes acceptable for people to portray these behaviors. What do you think, Vanessa?
I want to emphasize that David was talking about is challenging, like even the abuses within our families, challenging the so-called leaders within our local governments, our families, and in our neighborhoods, because the cycle continues. It's rampant and it's not talked about enough. And I think this conversation, when it comes to migrant people coming over here and dying, they are dying and they are being assaulted, they are being abused, they are being victimized, and yet no one's talking about it. It's angering. And I think it's important for everyone to start listening to this. I think, David, having you here today is really significant, because we don't know. I don't know what's going on. All I have is the news, and it's usually like, oh, it's okay. Everything's okay. Don't worry about it. That's what my mom tells me. Don't worry about it. And it's harmful. It's harmful not taking, like how you said, you're either an activist or you're not. And it's important to continue that work, to continue in the paths that have been carved out for us by our elders that have been doing the work, that have been putting in the energy, that have been in the background, that aren't getting recognized, to make it so that the next generation has an understanding of what is happening and can do something about it, can challenge those leaders within the community that aren't doing their job, that aren't protecting the people, even in the local governments. When you were talking about that it's not just within our tribal governments, but in our local governments that we can make changes by challenging those systems. I had a talk at City Council in Sacramento after Stephon Clark was murdered by police. I had to share my story. I live with a severe mental illness and experienced police brutality in 2012. And I had to talk about that story, and it was very difficult, but I knew it was the right thing to do, because I needed my leaders in my community to hear that story so they would do something. If we don't share these stories, these cycles of abuses and harm just continue. And so by sharing these stories, we're challenging that right now. We're challenging it right now. So I thank David for sharing that today.
As we all know that when it comes to immigration, the issue really now is children who are without parent or parents, who are now being held in these places for under Homeland Security. But we're talking children now, and that's still going on, because Congress is still debating what can we do, what we should do, what we shouldn't be doing, and there's a whole debate going on right now. But it's now hit federal land, the Tohono Nation. What do we do now with these children? What's there to fear with children? We should be helping them. That's just how I feel about that. Now, murder is another issue in itself, and that's happening also.
We're talking about human lives, children dying and actively being held in these detention centers. This isn't just, infrastructure. We're talking about inanimate objects. These are children, and it's even super interesting when we consider the fact that we're always talking about this being a religious nation, right? In God we trust. We look at the dollar bill and it says, in God we trust. But what will Christ do? If we're talking about God, what will Christ do in these circumstances, right? And how come what will Christ would do? It never takes precedent to the decisions that are being made when we are supposed to be trusting in God. So it all puzzles me, David.
But that's a good example of what happens politically, but it has an impact with the people. But whether you know it or not, Caesar Pascua Yaqui tribe is looking at building a casino right next door to Old Pascua in the future, which will be their third casino. I don't know what you think about that, but it will generate a lot more money than for Pascua Yaqui.
What I think might land me on the hot seat, but we always we always say that this podcast is uncensored. We like to keep it. When we started, David,
yes,
it might seem like you might think this guy Caesar, it's quite unorganized, and yeah, I am quite unorganized. So.
I have a lot of respect for you, Caesar.
But Vanessa is very organized. But I appreciate and I respect you, quite a bit, David, and I've learned a lot from you, across the years. But one thing I do truly admire of you is that ability to express what you're feeling, but not just from something you heard, but it's from something you experienced.
Mhm.
Your experiences come from life experiences, things you have felt, you know, with your own hands, things you have seen, things you have smelled, things you will never forget, as you were mentioning, and it you speak on behalf of those experiences without any care, that it will land you in a hot seat, or it will land you in a situation in which people might look at you differently. And I want to be that way, um, so my opinion on that, third casino, uh, opening up, uh, I, I truly want to see one day, um, the Yueme people, Pascua Yaqui, and the 8 pueblos in Sonora to have the same rights, to have
Mhm.
the same opportunities, to be a citizen in one of the 8 pueblos should be to be a citizen at Pascua Yaqui. It doesn't matter whether the person chooses to continue living in Rio Yaqui or whether they
Right.
choose to move to the States, but we are one nation as a whole, and we shouldn't be divided. We shouldn't be separated on the basis of a document which basically limits the rights of our indigenous peoples. That brings us down. I hope, naturally hope that, this casino is successful. Of course, I hope that. I hope it
Sure,
brings,
of course.
you know, revenue to our people so they can keep making changes. But I also hope that it brings change, that it brings change into our nation and into our people.
While we were waiting for you to log back on, I don't know, Cesar, if you want to start it off, in trying to ask that. Well, what I was saying was I'm really impressed and grateful that you have such a great resiliency to be able to witness all these things and continue that fight. You said you're 69 years old, correct?
Yes. Yes.
And you're continuing fighting for other folks for their rights.
So again, it goes back to storytelling, the kinds of ways that they had to endure living day to day with the O'odham people from their own experience, because there's a lot to lose.
Mhm.
There's a lot to lose. The system is the way that it is, and you most of the time you're going to go with the status quo. To do what? To follow the status quo? To not challenge it, to not live up to, and to speak to, and to uphold what our preamble says in our Constitution? There's something wrong here, people. You have to look at the bigger picture. So does that make sense?
Yeah, we're just making sure we don't interrupt because I think that's the most important thing I've gained from this is listening to you. Um, and I'm blown away. I'm oblivious to a lot of these things. And so I'm just really grateful that you're sharing them with us. I don't have words to express or say what I can or cannot understand because I'm just still not amazed. That's not the word. Um, just shaken up. I feel like someone picked me up and kind of shook me up a little bit, which is good. That's necessary, I think, for people to understand, to start learning about these things and start doing something about these things. So,
What is the purpose of being a leader, like you mentioned, a tribal leader, if we're not there for the people, right? If our intentions are the wrong ones. So I think this is something that every single person, every single youth that comes to get an education or that one day aspires to be a tribal leader, right? To really reconsider, why do I want to be a tribal leader? And like you mentioned, do I want to be a tribal leader just to follow the status quo? Or am I going to be a tribal leader to truly bring change to my people, even if that means going against the current, right? So that's something very important that I think is a huge takeaway for the younger generation. David, Vanessa and I were talking about a segment of this podcast that we call "Laughing is Medicine" or "Laughter is Medicine." You've been sharing some pretty funny stories with us. Any other stories you got there with quite a bit of humor? I was telling Vanessa you got pretty good humor. I said you just gotta wait till it hits, and it hits you good. You know, anything you want to share with us?
Yeah, it's people say that I'm a very serious person. I don't think so. I mean, there's a time when you have to be serious and what have you, but I like to laugh and joke and what have you. But it's a lot more funny when you're talking in O'odham, stuff like that, and it's probably no different if you speak another language. But yeah, there's a lot of just like today at our tribal district community meeting, and I was talking to our chairperson of our community, and we were joking about how the candidates came, and I was sharing with my. She was asking me, "You met my girlfriend Etta." She said, "So how long do you think you'll be out there in the nation?" I said, "Well, we've got 3 people that are running for 1 seat, and I don't know how long it's going to be. It might be maybe 12 o'clock, maybe 3 o'clock or so when it'll be over." And she looked at me. She said, "Well, how long is it going to take to bullshit you guys?" How long is it going to take to bullshit you guys? And I started laughing. I started laughing and said, "I don't know how long it's going to take. They're going to be coming and campaigning." They say, "Well, I hope it don't take too long to bullshit you." So I was sharing that with our community chairperson, and he just burst out laughing. But it was funny. It was funny. I was having a bullshit session. So is that going to be part of your podcast season?
David, let me ask you this: how long did it take to get?
Definitely.
How long did the bullshit took place, huh?
Well, we started, I guess, about 9:30 or so. I think we ended probably about 1:30, but there were only two out of the 3 showed up. So I was, but everything went well,
Yeah.
But it was just funny the way she put it this morning. I had to just laugh and laugh.
It's true. Tribal politics are politics nonetheless, huh?
Yeah. But yeah, it was. We laughed on the way out to the meeting. Then we were laughing on the way back because some of the things that were said and what have you. But I mean, you're bound to change. There's no question about it. It's just you're bound to change, just like I did when I went to the East Coast. Okay, I changed. I know that. I didn't know that at the time, but I was when I come back from my holiday vacation every year, maybe twice a year, and people that I grew up with, they say, "Hey, you know what? You changed." I say, "What do you mean you changed?" "I changed." "No, I didn't change." "Well, you talk different, you act different, you dress different, you know." And then this is what happened to me even with language. At that time, everybody had phones, home phones. Well, not everybody, but the only way I would, when I call call home and I talk to my grandfather, and we would talk, all the time. And one time I heard him laughing in the background, and I asked him, I said, "Why is it that I'm always when I try to talk to you, you're always laughing at me? Are you laughing at me?" And he said, "Well, you know what? I can't understand what you're trying to say." And it didn't dawn on me. It didn't dawn on me that what was happening was that I was losing the language.
Wow.
You know? And so every opportunity that I got to come back to Arizona from Connecticut, I always made it a point to talk all the time. And that was, I didn't know that until way a long time after that. I didn't realize that in fact I was losing the language. So, like I said, every opportunity that I got, I would, when I come back home, I was always spending a lot of time with my grandparents and my mom and my aunts, and then go out to the res down by the border where they have homes, just stay out there. So yeah, you're bound to change, and it's no different from anybody else. But what didn't change was going back to what I said way earlier, is remembering when I was a young kid, when I was always with my grandfather. Most of the time I was with my grandfather, but I was always with him when we would go to meetings with other elders and to listen to the stories that they taught, what they experienced.
David, we're truly thankful to have you on, David. I think you have so much knowledge, David, and it goes back to the idea that you live these things. It's not something that you heard or you saw on TV, or these are actual livings that you went through, and I think that's a very important part that we need to tell our people. These are stories coming directly from our elders, passed down, experienced, and lived by the elders, that we have to really pay attention to. And that's what we're all about here in this podcast. Reaching out to the people who need to be heard. Because it's so easy nowadays to get caught up with our cell phones, all these other things that are so easy to access, yet they really provide nothing for our people.
Well, let me just end it, and I'm assuming we're going to end our conversation. It's probably been within the past maybe 15 years now, where more and more women are now stepping up into making decisions. But it just didn't start, because as I traveled through Indian country, most of the decision makers were women. I mean, nobody wants to hear that, but that's the truth. That is the truth. I mean, I've traveled from Massachusetts all the way down to Florida, to the southern states, and up in those areas, and met some of these tribal members, and it's the women that make the decisions. And when you look at our tribal, I'm talking about the Tohono Nation tribal government, or the tribal council, the majority of them are women. But in a different setting. But the women have always been the decision makers, and we've just been following, regardless whether we like it or not. we may put ourselves off that we are the ones, but it doesn't work like that. Where I really saw it strongly was when Dennis Banks had to flee. He had to flee Southern California, or California, when he was on the run, and he ended up in Syracuse, New York, the Onondaga. What is it? Is it I think it is the Onondaga Reservation. And he was hiding out on that reservation, and so I went down to Syracuse, that reservation, and so the elders were the women were trying to convince him not to turn himself in, but he got tired of running. He wanted to be with his family, and so he eventually gave up running. But it was the women. When I saw it was the women, the longhouse, the six, the what is it? The Iroquois Nation, the Senecas, the Mohawks, Tuscaroras. These were all women that were trying to convince Dennis Banks not to turn himself in. But overall, they were the decision makers on that reservation there. But there's been other places where I've been where it's been the same thing. It's been the women. So young lady like yourself, somebody's going to tell you need to step up. That's if you haven't, but I'm sure you probably have. I'm sure that you get a lot of, you start stepping on people's toes, you're going to get a lot of static. But that's just how it is.
David,
but, yes,
she stepped up so much that she's gathered quite a lot of positive attention from all kinds of uncles out there.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
all right.
no. Oh, no.
That's been my experience. But you know what? I want to thank both of you for allowing me to be a part of this. I don't know what people are going to get out of it, but I think I was just being honest and straightforward, and hopefully I was able to at least give you some information that you might want to think about. But the main thing would be to share it is to whom and to as many people as you can. But again, I just want you to remember my friend who was an elder. He was a teacher, he was an elder, and he was the teacher who passed away, lived in Santa Ana, taught the Nahuatl language, and he was from Pueblo. So I'll be heading out there to California on May 7th to participate and be a part of this memorial on May the 9th at 209 East Lincoln Avenue in Orange County.
And when I moved back to LA, David, as I was telling you, in late August, early September, you're gonna have a home there. So whenever you want to come and stay, you can stay there. So
we're in Hollywood.
I'll be prepping my council speech, so I won't be bullshitting you too long. Maybe. You take care, David, and thanks so much for everything.
Thank you so much, David. It was nice meeting you.
Yes, you take care.
You too.